Fewer than 0.001% of all Earth measurement datasets collected since the mid-20th century produce anomalies outside expected error margins, and none of those anomalies, when retested, overturn the established model of an oblate spheroid planet. This is the life story of a doctrine built not on discovery of a hidden shape, but on interpretation of uncertainty, how it formed, adapted, reached influence, and settled into a persistent but understood pattern within modern information systems. A lesser known fact is that the Earth's equatorial diameter exceeds its polar diameter by about 43 kilometers. A design compromise of rotational physics that prevents it from being a perfect sphere. It began with a gap between observation and understanding. The physical shape of Earth cannot be perceived directly from the ground. It must be inferred through layered systems of measurement astronomy, navigation, and later satellite geodesy. That reliance on indirect evidence created an opening where doubt could grow, especially when methods were not widely understood. A lesser-known fact is that early long-distance curvature measurements, using canal experiments in the 19th century, produced mixed results due to atmospheric refraction. A test result that confused interpretation rather than clarified it. The parents of the doctrine were not institutions, but conditions. Complexity of scientific explanation, uneven distribution of education, and periods of restricted information all contributed. During the Cold War, organizations such as the Central Intelligence Agency operated within high secrecy, unintentionally reinforcing the perception that critical knowledge could be withheld from the public. A lesser-known fact is that satellite reconnaissance programs like Corona kept imagery classified for decades. A supply constraint that delayed public familiarity with orbital observation. Early forms of the idea were fragmented, some focused on map distortions, others on horizon perception, others on mistrust of photographic evidence. There was no single unified claim, only overlapping interpretations of incomplete understanding. A lesser-known fact is that the Mercator projection inflates the apparent size of Greenland to nearly equal Africa, despite Africa being about 14 times larger. A production issue of Map Design. Childhood of the doctrine was shaped by repetition. Claims were circulated, repeated, and reinforced within small groups. Verification was rare, and correction often ineffective because it required more effort to understand than the original claim. A lesser-known fact is that repeated statements, even when false, can increase perceived truthfulness by around 20%. A psychological effect known as repetition bias. Small misunderstandings carry disproportionate weight. Camera lens distortion, for example, became a central argument. Wide-angle lenses do bend straight lines near edges, but this optical property was interpreted as evidence of manipulation rather than limitation of equipment. A lesser-known fact is that fisheye lenses can produce curvature distortion exceeding 15% at frame edges, a design compromise used intentionally for wider field of view. Growth accelerated with digital platforms. Information moved faster, and communities formed around shared skepticism. Algorithms favored engagement, and unusual claims generated more interaction than routine explanations. A lesser-known fact is that engagement-based ranking systems can amplify fringe content visibility by over 50%, a production issue of modern information distribution. Standardization emerged within the doctrine. Arguments became consistent questioning of satellite imagery, dismissal of institutional authority, emphasis on direct observation. It began to resemble a structured framework rather than scattered ideas. A lesser-known fact is that structured argument sets increase internal coherence of belief systems, functioning as a countermeasure against external critique. At its peak, the doctrine shifted focus. The claim was no longer simply about Earth's shape. It became about control of knowledge. The idea of hidden truth gained more attention than the specifics of geometry. A lesser-known fact is that belief systems often evolve from content-focused to authority-focused frameworks. indicating a command doctrine shift in reasoning. A defining moment in this phase often appears in debate. Measurements are presented: satellite, orbits, curvature calculations, GPS triangulation. Instead of engaging directly, the framework itself is questioned. If the system is dismissed, the data within it becomes irrelevant. A lesser-known fact is that GPS accuracy relies on trilateration using at least 4 satellites, achieving positional precision within a few meters, a test result validated globally. Why? It works in that moment is because it reduces complexity. Accepting a single hidden explanation requires less cognitive effort than understanding layered systems of measurement and correction. A lesser-known fact is that high cognitive load encourages reliance on simplified explanations, even when less accurate, a well-documented psychological effect. The cost emerges gradually. Time is invested in maintaining and defending the framework. Exposure to conflicting information can create stress or fatigue. Social interactions may become strained when foundational assumptions differ. A lesser-known fact is that prolonged engagement in high-conflict discussions can elevate stress hormones, indicating measurable physiological impact. There are secondary effects. Misinterpretation of Earth shape can extend into misunderstanding of navigation, climate science, and satellite communication. The impact spreads beyond the original claim. A lesser-known fact is that misunderstanding one scientific domain can reduce comprehension in related domains by measurable percentages. Showing interconnected knowledge structures, that fatigue becomes informational. Continuous exposure to competing claims leads some to disengage, while others become more entrenched. The doctrine requires constant reinforcement to maintain coherence. A lesser-known fact is that information overload can reduce analytical accuracy by up to 20%, particularly in complex subjects. Meanwhile, measurement systems continue independently. Satellites orbit, ground stations track, and models refine. Multiple independent methods converge on the same result within narrow error margins. A lesser-known fact is that satellite laser ranging can measure distances to orbiting objects with millimeter precision, confirming orbital predictions. Old age does not bring disappearance. The doctrine stabilizes. It loses novelty but retains a core group of adherents. Attention shifts to new topics, but the structure remains intact. A lesser-known fact is that fringe theories often maintain stable baseline adherence even after public interest declines. Replacement occurs through improved access and education, open data initiatives, transparent methodologies, and public engagement reduce barriers to understanding, though not uniformly. A lesser-known fact is that open-access scientific databases now host millions of datasets, reducing reliance on restricted sources. New doctrines emerge in different domains, following similar patterns: complexity, simplification, reinforcement. The specific topic changes, but the mechanism persists. A lesser-known fact is that recurring patterns of belief formation appear across unrelated subjects, indicating underlying cognitive consistency. Its legacy is not about the Earth itself. The planet's shape is measured through independent systems: geodesy, satellite observation, gravitational modeling, and these systems agree. The legacy lies in how information is interpreted under uncertainty. A lesser-known fact is that convergence of independent measurement methods is considered strong validation in scientific practice. What later systems learn is the importance of communication. Data must be accessible, but also understandable. Transparency alone is not enough without context. A lesser-known fact is that effective science communication can significantly increase public trust when sustained over time, and so the doctrine settles into a quiet presence, not dominant, not absent, but persistent. It remains as a reflection of the gap between measurement and belief. A lesser-known fact is that uncertainty, when not clearly explained, can lead to misinterpretation in a significant portion of audiences. The Earth continues unchanged in its forms, lightly flattened, continuously measured, precisely modeled. The fear was never in its shape. It was in the space where understanding had not yet caught up with information. Nearly 8 million gigabytes of Earth observation data are processed daily across global networks. Yet the number of individuals capable of independently verifying even a fraction of that data remains extremely small. The doctrine enters its final phase not through collapse, but through dilution absorbed into a wider landscape of competing explanations, each shaped by how people choose to handle complexity. A lesser-known fact is that data compression used in satellite transmission can reduce file sizes by over 80%. A design compromise that preserves usability while introducing minor artifacts. At this stage, the environment changes more than the doctrine itself. Artificial intelligence systems begin to assist in analysis, filtering vast datasets into interpretable outputs. These systems increase accessibility, but they also introduce another layer between observation and understanding. A lesser-known fact is that automated classification algorithms in Earth observation can achieve accuracy rates above 90%. Though they still require human validation to correct edge cases, interpretation becomes mediated, fewer people interact with raw data, more rely on processed results. This creates efficiency, but also dependence. Trust shifts from institutions alone to systems that interpret on behalf of users. A lesser-known fact is that reliance on automated decision systems can reduce independent verification behavior by measurable margins. A crew training detail concern. In modern workflows, small discrepancies continue to play a disproportionate role. Outliers in data sets, rare measurement errors. Unusual atmospheric effects are isolated and amplified within certain frameworks. These anomalies are real, but their significance is often overstated relative to overall consistency. A fact is that even highly accurate measurement systems maintain error margins, typically expressed as standard deviations, a test result characteristic essential for scientific interpretation. Efforts to address misunderstanding evolve. Instead of only presenting conclusions, systems increasingly show processes, how data is collected, corrected, and validated. Transparency becomes procedural, not just informational. A lesser-known fact is that step-by-step visualization of data processing can improve user comprehension by over 25%. According to usability studies, A. Defining scenario in this phase involves layered verification. A user checks a satellite path, compares it with independent trackers, and overlays positional data with ground observations. Each layer confirms the same underlying geometry. The system works not because of a single proof, but because of convergence. A lesser-known fact is that independent satellite tracking, NetWORKS, can predict orbital positions within a few kilometers globally, a countermeasure against reliance on single-source data. While the doctrine still persists in fragments, is tied to perception of scale. The more precise the measurements become, the less intuitive they feel. Centimeter-level adjustments to planetary models do not align easily with everyday experience. A lesser-known fact is that human spatial intuition struggles with scales beyond a few kilometers, a cognitive limitation affecting interpretation of planetary data. The cost shifts again. It is no longer primarily about conflict between claims, but about disengagement. Some individuals choose not to engage with complex systems at all, leaving interpretation to others. A lesser-known fact is that disengagement from complex information environments can increase reliance on simplified narratives by up to 30%. For those who remain engaged, fatigue becomes selective attention. Not every claim is evaluated, not every anomaly is pursued. Priority is given to sources and systems deemed reliable, creating personal frameworks of trust. A lesser-known fact is that trust-based filtering can improve efficiency of information. processing, but may also limit exposure to alternative perspectives. Meanwhile, the physical model of Earth continues to refine quietly. Satellite constellations expand, measurement intervals shorten, and error margins narrow. Changes are incremental, not revolutionary. A lesser-known fact is that global positioning systems now incorporate corrections for tectonic drift, adjusting coordinates by centimeters per year. The divergence between measurement and interpretation stabilizes into coexistence. Scientific systems operate on continuous refinement, while alternative frameworks maintain internal consistency without integration. A lesser-known fact is that parallel information systems can persist indefinitely when reinforced by distinct social and cognitive structures. Over time, the doctrine loses urgency. It becomes one example among many of how uncertainty can be shaped into narrative. Its influence remains, but its centrality fades. A lesser-known fact is that attention to specific fringe theories declines over time. Though underlying patterns of reasoning remain active, replacement does not remove the structure, it redistributes it. Similar patterns appear in new contexts as technology, health, environment teach adapting the same mechanisms of simplification and reinforcement. A lesser-known fact is that transferable belief frameworks allow rapid adaptation to new subjects with minimal structural change. Its legacy becomes clearer in hindsight. Not a hidden truth uncovered, but a process revealed how humans navigate complexity, how trust is built or withdrawn, how information becomes belief. A lesser-known fact is that studies of misinformation are increasingly used to design better communication strategies in science and policy. What remains constant is the convergence of independent systems. Navigation, climate modeling, telecommunications all rely on the same underlying geometry of Earth, and all function within expected parameters. A lesser-known fact is that interdependent systems provide mutual validation, reducing likelihood of large-scale error across domains. And so the doctrine reaches a quiet end state, not erased, not dominant, but integrated into the broader understanding of how information behaves in complex environments. A lesser-known fact is that mature information ecosystems often include persistent fringe elements without destabilizing. Overall function, the Earth continues as it has measured, modeled, and observed with increasing precision. The distance between knowledge and belief remains, but it is now recognized as part of the system rather than a flaw within it. Roughly 100,000 commercial flights navigate daily using models of Earth's curvature, and even minor deviations of a few kilometers would accumulate into measurable routing errors within hours if those models were wrong. The doctrine, by this point, no longer competes directly with measurement. It coexists beside it, operating in a different layer of interpretation where verification is less important than narrative coherence. A lesser-known fact is that flight management systems calculate great circle routes, the shortest path on a curved surface, reducing fuel use by measurable percentages. A design compromise favoring efficiency over visual intuition. In this late stage, the system around the doctrine becomes more resilient than the doctrine itself. Navigation, telecommunications, weather forecasting, and space operations all depend on consistent planetary models. These systems reinforce each other continuously, creating a network of validation that does not rely on any single authority. A lesser-known fact is that redundancy across independent systems acts as a countermeasure against large-scale model failure, ensuring that discrepancies are quickly detected. The doctrine adapts by narrowing its scope. Instead of challenging entire systems, it focuses on interpretation of specific elements, imagery, data gaps, or perceived inconsistencies. The scale of claim becomes smaller, but more detailed. A lesser-known fact is that narrowing focus to specific anomalies can increase perceived credibility within a group, a psychological effect tied to depth over breadth. A defining interaction in this phase often involves demonstration rather than argument. A navigation system is used, a satellite path is tracked, a horizon is measured over distance. Results align with established models, but interpretation remains flexible depending on prior assumptions. A lesser-known fact is that curvature over 100 kilometers corresponds to a drop of approximately 784 meters relative to a tangent line, a test result derived from standard geometric models. Why the doctrine persists in fragments is not due to lack of evidence, but because evidence alone does not determine belief. Trust, familiarity, and cognitive comfort play equal roles. The system of belief becomes self-sustaining even when external validation is available. A lesser-known fact is that belief persistence can remain stable even after exposure to corrective evidence. A phenomenon documented across multiple studies. The cost at this stage is subtle and distributed. It appears in fragmented conversations, reduced consensus on shared facts, and occasional misalignment between systems of knowledge. These effects are not catastrophic, but they are measurable. A lesser-known fact is that reduced consensus on basic facts can impact collective decision-making, efficiency by measurable margins in group studies. Fatigue becomes normalization. Exposure to conflicting claims no longer produces a strong reaction. It becomes part of the background. Individuals develop tolerance, filtering information without engaging deeply. A lesser-known fact is that repeated exposure to conflicting information can desensitize responses, reducing emotional engagement over time. Meanwhile, scientific systems continue their incremental work. Satellite constellations increase in number and capability. Measurement intervals shorten. Models refine with each new dataset. A lesser-known fact is that modern Earth's observation satellites can revisit the same location multiple times per day, improving temporal resolution significantly. The gap between systems stabilizes into equilibrium. One system prioritizes continuous refinement and verification. The other maintains internal coherence through selective interpretation. Both persist without direct resolution. A lesser-known fact is that stable coexistence of divergent frameworks is a recognized phenomenon in information ecosystems. Over time, the doctrine becomes less about content and more about pattern. It serves as an example of how complex information can be simplified, reshaped, and sustained within communities. A lesser-known fact is that pattern recognition in belief systems allows researchers to predict how new narratives may form and spread. Replacement continues quietly. New topics emerge, new uncertainties arise, and attention shifts. The structure remains, ready to attach two different questions. A lesser-known fact is that transfer of reasoning frameworks across topics can occur rapidly, often within a single cycle of public attention. Its legacy is not a changed understanding of the Earth, but a clearer view of human interaction with knowledge. It demonstrates that access to data does not guarantee alignment of interpretation. A lesser-known fact is that increased data availability can sometimes widen interpretive gaps rather than close them, depending on context. What remains constant is convergence. Independent measurements from satellites, navigation systems, and ground observations continue to align within defined margins. The physical model holds because it is continuously tested. A lesser-known fact is that convergence of independent verification methods is considered one of the strongest indicators of scientific reliability, and so the doctrine reaches its quiet conclusion. It does not disappear. It becomes part of the background of modern information environments, understood, studied, and anticipated rather than confronted directly. A lesser-known fact is that mature systems often incorporate understanding of fringe ideas into their design, improving resilience against misinformation. The Earth continues in its measured form, slightly flattened. precisely tracked and consistently modeled. The doctrine leaves behind not fear of its shape, but a record of how easily the unknown can be reshaped into something that feels certain.